Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled The Evolution of Driver Safety Programs, AI, ML, and the Power of Predictive Analytics. I am TCA's Director of Education, Shayna Gibson, and on behalf of TCA's entire leadership team, I would like to thank you for joining us today. I would also like to express our sincere appreciation to Idelic for their generosity in sponsoring today's webinar. A few reminders before we get started. Attending TCA's educational events, such as this webinar, provides you with an opportunity to earn a certificate in human resources, recruitment, and retention. We also have a certificate for fleet management. Please visit truckload.org's education page to make sure you are maximizing your opportunity to earn the credit and recognition for attending these events. Should you become disconnected from today's event, you may rejoin by clicking the link provided in your registration and reminder emails. Also, a disclaimer has been posted in the chat window for today's session. So today's session is being recorded. All webinar registrants will receive an email within 48 hours of the live webinar, which will include instructions and a link to access the recording. Questions can be submitted using the Q&A or chat icon found at the bottom of your screen, and we will acknowledge your question once it has been submitted. And we would also love to see where everyone is listening in from today. Please let us know that by typing it into the chat. It is now my pleasure to hand the conversation over to Tara Beebe, Vice President of Marketing for Idelic. Tara, why don't you get us started today?
Thanks, Shayna, and good afternoon, good morning, and welcome again. It's great to be here with this panel, and I'm very confident over the next hour, these leaders will share some insights with all of you who are here today that you can take back with you to your fleet. Before we get started, and really I think to lend a little bit of credibility of why Idelic is hosting this session today, I want to introduce a little bit about what Idelic does. So we'll keep it quick, but I'm the marketing person, so here we go. Essentially, if you're not familiar with Idelic, we're a platform designed for fleets who need a comprehensive way to reduce crashes and lower losses. So what we do is we provide both the technology, which is known as Safety Suite, and a step-by-step process, which is contained in our driver safety playbooks, to deliver the insights and tools fleet leaders need to proactively spot risky driver behavior, and then ultimately use those playbooks to coach to those better outcomes. So a key to unlocking these insights is making your existing data work for you, which is obviously a lot of what we're going to talk about today around data and predictive analytics. We maintain an incredibly robust network of integration partners that bring together that important driver behavior. And then using over 40 billion miles of driving data and over 200,000 accident records, our machine learning models then build out what we call a driver watch list. This driver watch list is a stacked rank list of drivers at the highest risk for an accident in the next 90 days. So with these predictive insights, fleet managers, safety operations teams can apply Idelic's professional development plans developed by fleets for fleets to coach and engage to reduce that risk. In general, fleets who effectively use our program see up to a 20% crash reduction within the first year. So it's pretty powerful, it's straightforward, and it's consistent in how it delivers loss and accident reduction results, and ultimately keeping drivers safe. So some of you may have seen last month, we began, actually it's been quite some time, but we knew that the Idelic program could be more impactful to reducing a fleet's total cost of risk. So you might have seen that we launched the Idelic Insurance Agency, LLC, which is our technology-driven managing general agent focused on providing fleets who successfully use the Idelic program, customized insurance coverage and pricing. This decision is something that's been ongoing, and it's a way for us to continue to provide value to fleets who have that strong safety commitment. And it's a long-term vision of our company. So the initial response has been overwhelmingly positive, and ultimately we know in a climate where fleets are looking to preserve cash, reduce expenses, we'll continue to look for new innovative ways to build value. So with no further delay, let's go ahead and meet our speakers. We have Michael Lasco, Scott Reagan, and Brian Phillip with us today. Michael, let's start with you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Lasko. I'm the Director of EHS and Quality for Boyle Transportation.
Scott?
Good afternoon. Scott Reagan, Director of Health and Safety, T-Force Freight. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today.
All right, and I'm Brian Phillip. I am the CTO and Head of Product for Idelic.
Perfect. And as I said before, I'm Tara, and I'll be moderating this session today. So I want to kind of set up where we're going to go today. Obviously, even in the title, right, we're going to focus a lot on kind of unpacking what artificial intelligence and machine learning look like when it comes to driver safety programs, and talk a little bit about how fleets can kind of put that data to work and how that impacts their safety records. So everyone probably knows, artificial intelligence and machine learning are increasingly being used in the trucking industry to monitor driver behavior, promote safe driving practices. So driver monitoring systems can use a combination of sensors, cameras, other technologies to analyze driver behavior and identify those potential safety risks. Out of that, you end up with what can be more prescriptive and personalized coaching to improve driver performance. So AI and ML is essentially analyzing data collected from these systems to identify patterns in the driver behavior. This could be everything from distracted or drowsy driving to aggressive maneuvers or other, potential safety risks that are out there. Before we dive into kind of the future or current state of what that technology, I actually want to go into the way back time machine and discuss a little bit, particularly Michael, leveraging your experience here, Scott, your experiencing here, and talk about driver safety, techniques or technologies that were available prior to some of these that are more predictive and integrated. So Michael, I'm going to start with you here. And can you comment on what are some of the earlier safety programs that you've seen used over the years to manage driver safety?
Yeah, definitely. Initially, your early safety programs were very, very reactive in nature. They were primarily built on things like critical event reports or certain speeding reports that companies could get through their ELD or through telematics providers. And really, the problem with those was you lacked context, right? You didn't understand, there was a hard-braking event. Well, what prompted that hard-braking event, right? Just I know, in safety, we all want to say hard-braking is bad. But in some cases, hard-braking is good if you're doing it to avoid an accident, right? So you lack that context to really kind of, work proactively with the drivers. These are reactive metrics that we're working with. So, put a fine point on it. Yeah, it was early on, very reactive. Whatever, an incident had already occurred before we knew about it and could do anything with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Scott, what's been your experience?
Michael just nailed it. It was historical event. Historic behaviors are predictor of future events. And we had to rely on fun things, basic telematics, crash reports, motorist complaints. We were having to take all this information and paint with a very broad brush. We had to determine, hey, someone was at risk. Let's give our information to everyone. Let's send a driver trainer into a location and ride with everyone. Because we weren't really knowing how to address that risk. So that's the nice thing about what we're doing moving forward, is it allows us to be more focused. You use the word prescriptive, preventative. We're going to start seeing some of those issues arise earlier. And instead of having to take this old historic data and turning it into a scorecard, now we're going to get the technology where we get that information basically at our fingertips.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you both of you have already kind of touched on them a little bit. I'd love to ask a little bit more around, the limitations to these approaches. Michael, can you talk a little bit more about when you say they lack context, what does that mean?
Yeah, so, in a time before we had video cameras, Boyle Transportation, we've been an early adopter of technologies, whether it's ADAS or camera systems or what have you. Before you had video, you would just get these, kind of data, hardcore data, just a pile of, graphs and charts. And this is when the guy hit the brake and this is how fast he slowed down. And that's great, great information to let you know when something happens. But what prompted that to happen? Was the driver not paying attention? Did somebody cut in front of the driver? we don't know. It's anybody's guess, right? So the limitation with these programs and some of the approaches back then was the accuracy of the data or the interpretation of the data. It's very easy to misinterpret in those days early on, misinterpret some of these data points and maybe assign a value that is totally inappropriate. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, cameras made me realize was how I wondered how many times in the past have I been wrong? Where I told the driver, hey, you had a preventable accident based on what's in the police report, based on this hard braking report, this is preventable. And then we started getting, you know, we got cameras and we started realizing, wait a minute, a lot of times the information on the police report is not correct. The witnesses' statements were not correct. The telematics, you know, critical event report, yeah, our driver hit the brakes, but he hit the brakes because he had to, right? So, you know, we're really limited on, you know, the context of what caused an event, or, you know, what were the circumstances around that. So as technology has improved and things like cameras and, you know, risk assessment scoring and those kind of things have come about in the industry, it's been game changer. Absolutely.
Tara, real quick, it's that reliable, Michael nailed it. It's that reliable information. You know, the good news is we have dash cams now. The bad news is we have dash cams, and it helps us, you know, confirm the facts and be less cynical. We can rely on good factual data. He nailed it.
Yeah. One of the things, Scott, that you had mentioned, I'd love to just poke at it a little bit more, is you had mentioned, you know, the difference between targeted coaching versus you know, being in a scenario where you have to roll out broad-based training or ride-alongs, like you said, with all of your drivers. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of why the targeted approach is more valuable?
Sure, it's to be efficient. You know, when we have a qualified trainer go onto location to address issues, they already know the answer to the test. They walk in and understand that these drivers, because of that reliable information, we've now put it in context, we understand that they're demonstrating some of those at-risk behaviors. And unfortunately, it's not a matter of if, but when that event occurs. So instead of, you know, us sending Brian into a location and him having to ride with every driver, and there's still a value in that. However, for efficiency, maybe staffing, maybe Brian is on limited time, we can send him in to talk to those 3 drivers that we know, because of all the data and everything that's packaged together, that they need help. They need, you know, to help, you know, improve their awareness, their driving. You know, again, it's a targeted approach where we understand those people to be most efficient with our time and resources.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, you know, if I had to kind of recap what I'm hearing, it sounds like, you know, earlier ways of managing driver safety, even telematics, they're not that old. They're pretty widely accepted, adopted, right? But, you know, telematics, police reports, witness reports, broad-based driver coaching initiatives, while helpful, still, when they are siloed, you end up with incomplete information. And so you end up with frontline managers that are responding to incidents versus having maybe a data-driven view in front of them that they can engage with a driver before the accident takes place. And Scott, like I said, I love what you said around targeted coaching versus those broad-based initiatives. I want to get into really talking about data within fleets, and in preparation for our time here today, I did a little bit of research just to understand how much data fleets are working with really on obviously a daily basis. And I came across a report that was published by the Commercial Carrier Journal in 2020 that the average truck, just the average truck, generates about 2.5 terabytes of data per year. And so this includes telematics, electronic logging devices, any other sensors that are in there. And that is just the truck alone. That doesn't include other logistics, customer data, compliance data, financial data, human resources. It goes on and on. And then, you know, another stat that I came across that was pretty fascinating to me was by Markets and Markets in 2020. And they project that the global fleet management market was projected to be about 15.9 million in 2020, but it's expected to reach 31.5 billion in 2025. And so this really suggests that the use of fleet management technologies, broad ones, right, which collect and analyze data on vehicles' driver performance, is growing rapidly. So there is no doubt that fleets are just surrounded by data sources. What was maybe lacking is now, incredibly rich that's there. And so to kind of start and transition into talking about data, and Scott, we're going to start with you on this one, but can you talk a little bit about how this steady increase of available data sources in fleet safety operations has, improved decision-making?
Oh, 100%. We're getting this information. Again, it's more reliable. It's given us the information we need to address the problems, make informed decisions, focus on those at-risk behaviors that are resulting in losses. We're able to identify those drivers. And again, it's reliable data. A lot of times drivers don't understand, they get very complacent. They don't understand that, hey, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. Well, here's the data to show that maybe I do have a following distance issue, or maybe, maybe that roadside inspection that showed an unsafe behavior is really showing through in some of the other data that we're getting. So it's helping us move past that complacency, helping everyone, the operations, local leadership, the driver, that, hey, there's an issue and we need to resolve it, and we need to get ahead of it instead of talking after the crash.
Yeah. Michael, anything to add here on kind of data sources?
Yeah, I think, the more and more data that becomes available with different technologies, whether it's ADAS or telematics or camera systems, all these awesome tools that we now have, really what it does, it gives us this holistic view of a driver, right? Where you have all these data points, and, you might have maybe an area of focus in your safety program right now. Maybe your company had a high number of backing accidents. Well, you can take a look at all this data and know where you need to spend your efforts, devote resources to fixing that issue, right? And then once you drive down the backing accidents, well, now your number 2 cause of accidents now becomes the number 1, right? So I always try to equate managing a safety program. It's kind of like playing whack-a-mole a little bit, right? That mole keeps popping its head up, and you have to, you whack it on the head and you drive it down, and now another mole popped up somewhere. So when you have all these different data points, there's never a time where you feel like, what do I do? Where do I go? You have that laid out. And I think the biggest value, and Scott kind of touched on this in his previous answer, is really in retention numbers. We kind of, here at Boyle Transportation, we kind of did away with that cookie cutter approach to safety, where it's like, hey, we had 2 backing accidents, give everybody back in training. We kind of went to an individualized approach. And I can tell you as a professional driver myself, that there's nothing more irritating to a driver than when you give them some training on some stuff that they don't have a problem with, right? And because the driver's saying to themselves, geez, I'm sitting here for, 2 hours doing this training, or however long it is, and now I'm going to miss seeing my kid's ball game when I get out of work, or whatever, right? As opposed to some training, some coaching, some interaction that is really individualized and dedicated to an issue that that you have, right? And as the driver, there's a couple of things. 1, you're receptive to the training, and 2, you feel like your company understands and appreciates you, right? When they know, hey, these are the things that make Mike Lasco tick, and somebody comes and says these things to me, I feel like, well, I work for a company where people get me and they want to help me be better. That will drive your retention numbers in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing the retention forward there, Michael. Brian, we are going to give you your day in the sun and hand a question over to you for this. Obviously, as a technologist yourself, you are highly familiar with data from this industry and plenty of other industries. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the common challenges or limitations that you see in the amount of data that fleets are ingesting these days?
Yeah, I mean, so far it kind of sounds like a panacea, right? Like, look at all this data. We can do all these amazing things with it. And I wish it was as easy as it sounds, but it's really not simple, right? So to me, there's a few things that like pop immediately to mind if we're talking about challenges or limitations. And the first is just the pure proliferation of the data. There's just so much of it out there, right? And whether it's digitizing existing platforms like the ELD or internal coaching records, digitalization of training records, or generating completely new data sets of new platforms like telematics, camera, onboard diagnostics, it's hard to keep up with what's even available to you as a safety manager to use when you're making decisions, and what's important, right? To sift through all that and figure out what do I even care about and want to get my hands on. So just the pure volume of data and understanding what's available and important is difficult. Number two, even if you have figured out what data is out there, what you want to do with it, it's never in the same place. It's in systems all over, right? You're probably running a separate system for ELD, for telematics, for camera, for training, for HR, CSA, that it's all over the place. And getting them to talk to one another doesn't usually happen. So you spend an inordinate amount of time going to all these different places and trying to get that comprehensive picture. So, and then third, even if you know what data is out there and you've somehow managed to get your hands on it and put it in one place, you can look at it holistically. Now you still have to figure out what matters, right? How do you sift through all of that? And you're going to find what we call false signals, right? Like trends that seem like maybe they mean something, but don't actually mean something. So how do you go through that and figure out what's worth taking action on? And like Scott said, right, it's about efficiency. I've only got so many people and hours to deploy to going out and trying to drive improvements. I need to know where to send those people. So for me, that's like the off top of my head, like issues, right? You got too much data. How do I get it in the same place? And then how do I sift through it to be able to make some sort of actionable decision on it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you, Brian. I think, and I want to, so we've kind of set up, right? A lot of data. What I'm hearing is, more data is definitely not always the answer. And it's a matter of being able to analyze, synthesize, actually lift up insights that are actionable, right? That you can apply to your fleet, whether it be driver coaching and training or other operational tweaks that need to be made that are there. And commonly you end up with fleets that are facing that overload, or there's quality concerns about the data itself. There's security, there's integrations, all of those things that have been mentioned here. So, as you heard me say before, obviously we are seeing a lot of solutions incorporate AI and ML into their technology. And one of the main reasons that we see that taking place, quite frankly, including Idelic, obviously, is it gives that analysis on a historical data set that allows it to then become more predictive. However, all of that said, I also think AI and ML is probably an overused term, and we don't always understand exactly what it is. Brian, I would love to have you kind of start out, and can you just give some basic definitions of what is artificial intelligence, what's machine learning? Give some examples. Are we using the right words?
Yeah, you're right. People oftentimes conflate or use those in the same way, and they're absolutely not the same thing. So AI, artificial intelligence, is really just about making a machine do something that a human would otherwise do, and that literally can be as simple as like a factory watching for defective M&Ms coming off of the manufacturing line and kicking them out. Like, that is a form of artificial intelligence. And certainly at the other end of the spectrum, right, we've got Siri making restaurant recommendations and reservations for us and doing that whole thing from end to end. Those are both types of AI, which basically just means we've told a computer how to do something that we otherwise would do. ML is a little bit different than that. Machine learning, or ML, that's to me actually the more interesting part, where we teach the machine to figure out something on its own rather than just being instructed on what we want it to do. So ML is allowing the machine to figure out things that we can't figure out on our own. Examples of this, there's different like categories of machine learning, like recommendation engines. Netflix, to tell you what movies and TV shows to watch, would be a recommendation engine that's driven by ML. Speech recognition in Siri is another category of machine learning. Facial recognition, like your Google Photos or Facebook or whatever, also machine learning. And then there's a category within machine learning called event prediction. And that's really where Idellic's more focused. Like we, as an example among many, use event prediction machine learning to predict accidents. So, for the purposes of the discussion that we're having here today, I don't really think this is an AI discussion as much as it's about ML. It's predictive ML, predictive machine learning is the technology that all of us can use to find these patterns and help us figure out what to do with all of this data, what the right interventions are.
Thank you. Yeah. So we had a question come in, and I'm gonna curveball this one into these next ones. Really, Michael, for you and Scott and Brian, you may have some perspective, but I think it's a fantastic question. So we had an individual ask, considering the rise in AI information meant to provide data easier to act on, everything we're saying, right, and designed to present rather than simply react, is alleged more present than ever. Okay. So how do we explain in recent years road safety in the industry reaching an all-time low? And the question is the reliance on technology making companies less active, more complacent, expecting those technologies to pick up the slack? And so I think this is really a fantastic question. And Scott and Michael, I'd love, and Michael, let's go ahead and start with you on this one. But the question that I was going to ask was around, how did you help people in your fleet trust the information that was being pulled forward? And I think, right, the lack of trust potentially has to do with are we removing the human element, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one thing that we do pretty well here at Boyle is we try to, we look at our professional drivers. They're on the same team that all the managers are on, right? And we involve them in that process. And we had drivers that, were beta testers for various technologies and let us know what they thought about it. And we have a professional driver advisory committee that these drivers came and told everybody, hey, this is what our experience was. We tried this out. We didn't like it because of X or whatever. So we involved our drivers into that process every step of the way so that they have some ownership and some say over what we do. As far as the complacency that that concern of complacency that can kick in if you become too comfortable thinking, hey, ADAS is going to drive the truck for you or whatever. We don't necessarily, I don't necessarily agree with that. There has been a rise in these safety statistics. Deaths every year has gone up. The problem with trying to pinpoint the root cause of that, I mean, I don't know if anybody has just yet. But I'll say this, we do an excellent job in this industry of coming out with best practices and technology and regulations designed to make motor carriers safer. And I totally 100% supporter and advocate of that. The problem is with any math problem, you're never going to solve it if you only try to balance one side of the equation. So we do an outstanding job of working with carriers and truck drivers and industry stakeholders. The rest of the motorists on the road get driver's ed training when they're 16 years old. And now you couple that with the fact that, there's electronic distractions that have permeated every aspect of our life, whether it's driving or, even walking down the street. There's a rise in pedestrians that get hit by vehicles ever since the advent of smartphones. So, I think there's a lot of research and investigation that needs to be done to determine the root cause of these rises. But in my opinion, I believe that technology is has been a good thing, a positive influence on those numbers, not a negative.
So Tara, Michael nailed it. But the safest piece of technology we have in our vehicles today is an awake, aware driver. It starts there, and this technology needs to be viewed as another tool in their toolbox. It's gonna help that driver share the road safely with our friends and family. Now that we have all this technology, we have to be transparent and, attack those informal leaders at locations. Those drivers that used to sit in the back of safety meetings with their arms crossed, right? They're the ones that always, well, Michael, you don't know. Well, Michael does, because Michael drove millions of miles and he's had that same influence, or, a trusted colleague, someone else that understands that information. But being transparent and understanding that, hey, this isn't crash prevention, it's crash mitigation. This technology is helping you become safe, but being transparent, getting those informal leaders. We did the same thing. We had some road team members, very involved in some of the forward-facing camera technology we had. And trust me, it only takes one. Go ahead and let one driver get exonerated where the video was useful, and them, coaching and hey, Brian had this really bad crash. We use this video as information to show that, hey, Brian did everything he could to prevent or minimize what occurred. Let that get out. Let that exoneration get out. Yeah. Use it as a recognition or reward tool. The one issue that we have is, hey, now that we have all this technology, we have to do something about it. We have to know that, hey, we're getting alerts from our telematics saying that Tara needs help with her following distance. Well, all of a sudden now she has a following distance crash and it gets into litigation. Trust me, there's a handful of people out there that would love that information to say, hey, Scott, you knew Tara had issues. Why didn't you act on it sooner? So great question from the chat. And hopefully we've given you a little bit more guidance of how at least we handle it in our opinion.
Those are fantastic, Brian. I'm gonna loop in another question here. I'd love to have you comment on, the next question was really going to be around, like, how do we keep people from getting tripped up when they're thinking about predictive analytics and trusting the data that is there. And so I'd love to have you comment on maybe a little bit, I suppose, the accuracy, or maybe a better word would say, how do you interpret the data that is you're either applying AI or ML to?
Okay, good question. But before I go there, in terms of kind of trusting the accuracy, I just to build on what Michael and Scott were just saying, you don't want to disambiguate this thing from the human aspect, right? If you go too far down the ML path and just tell people, hey, you should completely and implicitly trust this machine and just do exactly what it says, people do not trust that, right? This has to be part of a program. To me, it's more about, machine learning to assist the human beings in making the best decisions, and still leveraging the human beings to deliver those messages and make sure it's done, in a human way that is relatable. So I think, the very first thing to do in terms of building trust and avoiding kind of getting tripped up with all this is don't kick the humans out of the loop. They have to have a part of this process. Beyond that, if we're talking more about kind of the data side of it and accuracy, you do see people getting kind of into the whole right or wrong. And I think it was Scott who said this, it's not about accident prevention, it's accident remediation and mitigation, right? So machine learning is not magic. It is not going to be right every time. And just because it is wrong in some instance doesn't mean it's not working, right? You have to look holistically at the big picture, at all of the events and activity, to be able to draw a conclusion about accuracy. It's I always tell people it's kind of like the weather forecast. That's machine learning, right? And informed there. And sometimes the forecast is wrong and it doesn't rain at 2 o'clock, it rains at 4 o'clock, right? And we've gotten kind of spoiled recently of expecting precision and accuracy there. But just because it's off by a little bit does not mean it does not have value, right? And the forecast that we get, the data that we have for weather today is absolutely phenomenal compared to what we had 50 years ago. We would never do without it. And it's the same way when you're trying to use predictive analytics to solve any of the problems that we're talking about here. You're still going to have accidents, right? But is it a less severe accident? Is it fewer accidents? You can influence those things. And to kind of track that, you can't really, a piece of very specific advice I would give to people is you can't draw conclusions based on what happens in an hour or a day or even a week. We just don't have enough accidents in this industry. I know it feels like we do, but statistically, they're actually still pretty rare. So you can't look at that granular of a level. You have to measure these things over the course of months, quarters, and even years to really see whether or not you're having a statistically significant impact on outcomes. So I won't go too much farther than that, but that's top of mind for me.
And if I could piggyback a little bit on what Brian said. So, here at Boyle, one of our, our approach to safety is really, a risk reduction approach rather than, You hear a lot of like arbitrary goals of, mission to zero, or let's have zero accidents or something. And usually when drivers hear that, they tune you right out right after you say that statement. But the way that we look at it is there's risk. There's risk in everything that you do, whether it's me sitting here in this chair, there's a level of risk. We have to identify what those risks are and then try to mitigate them, right? And when predictive analytics is what enables that, right? So when we get risk assessment scores, Idelic offers a watch list score for drivers that have had some issues. So your camera providers generally all have some sort of a risk assessing score. And those are excellent indicators of where your next accidents are likely to happen and what types of behaviors are likely to cause these accidents, right? So when you identify that risk, which, machine learning, these things are excellent at that, you can now start acting on it and mitigating that risk and never have those problems, right? And then, you just wait for the next mole to pop its head up and then whack it on the head with some more data and some proactive response.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. I think there's a few other questions. I'm going to try to incorporate them in here. And if I don't get to them, then we will have some time here at the end. I think what I want to do is transition a little bit into Michael and Scott, having you share some of the success stories that you've seen in your own fleets or in your other or in other organizations that you've been at. I think what I'm hearing is, there's obviously, we know there's a lot of AI and ML being applied to these technologies, and there is value, and the value lies in its ability to make these predictions based upon historical data. And that's the really critical piece, right? Idelic itself leverages a data set of over 40 billion miles of driver data to build that watch list that you're referencing there. So essentially ML is then identifying those patterns and relationships between different variables, but we can't take the human element out of it. And all three of you have reiterated that. So I guess I will start here, Scott, with you. So can you share a little bit about how kind of having that comprehensive view of driver behavior has changed or improved your safety operations?
Sure. All this information, it's pointing us at risk behaviors. And helping us address individuals. And the difficult part is, you can never predict the crash you avoid or the injury that you prevent. So it's difficult to quantify it. But some of the successes we had were just, we use Idelic, we use the watch list score. It identifies drivers that are at a high score. So it's a scorecard. That first time you sit down with them and they don't realize that they're demonstrating those at-risk behaviors. Again, it was the person that had their arms crossed in the back of the safety meeting. But you start getting that buy-in, the trust of the information, starts helping them understand that, hey, I really do need to improve myself. I need to work on my craft. We had 115 drivers that we were able to move out of those scores just by basic conversations, reminding them of the basics, following distance, cornering, lane adjustments. But the really neat part was once they realize this information and they start understanding the value of it, word gets out, television, telephone, tell a friend, tell a driver what their score is. And all of a sudden, Tara, they wanted that information. They wanted that positive reinforcement. Every day they would be coming back in and going, hey, do I have any events that changed my score? How did I do yesterday? Well, all of a sudden, that got out quickly, and other people wanted to know what their score was. And it was a gamification. We're all internally competitive, and we all want to get better, And that was the one thing that we really saw from it. They started getting the trust, they started understanding it, and started moving the needles. We saw those at-risk behaviors start to diminish. And we all know those are the early indicators of something bad is about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Scott, I think Scott's absolutely right. I think as weird as it sounds, in some cases, the AI and the machine learning actually enables us to help identify those human aspects.
That's right.
That need addressing, right? I had an employee that for years had been an outstanding guy with excellent record, safety scores and risk assessment scores, right where you want them to be. And, and all of a sudden things started going kind of off the rails. And we had all these indicators that kind of point to, hey, there's a potential problem here. The level of risk is increasing with this employee. and we engage that employee and find out that, you know, there's somebody terribly ill in his family that's very close to him, and this is something that weighed on this driver, and we were able to take action and say, okay, let us help you out. Let us try to find something that's going to be a little bit more palatable for you, so that you can, you know, you're not under pressure and making those kind of bad choices or mistakes out on the road. So, you know, you start to think initially, hey, all this technology, it kind of removes the human element, but sometimes it helps expose it. And in some cases, that's, you know, just as valuable as, you know, watching an event video and a camera and telling the driver, hey, this is bad, right? You know, you're able to get that direction of focus to devote your resources.
Yeah.
And if I can interject just one piece here. So we've touched a lot on how these tools and technologies can help us in managing the drivers. But I think a level above that, it does help the driver manager, the safety manager, increase their confidence and be able to have these conversations as well. So if you're in a situation where you just dump in front of them, say, here's your access to Lytx and Samsara and FMCSA and you know, on and on and on, go make sure that you're managing the drivers that report to you. They don't know where to start. And in my experience has been, they tend to just shut down and do nothing because it's so overwhelming, right? If you can put it all together in that dashboard, run the analytics and give them that insight, it gives them more confidence, right? They know where to start and they know what to do. So I think it's important to keep in mind that it's not just about the drivers, but it's also about their support network, which is the dispatchers and managers in the organization as well.
Yeah, and Brian, that's a great point. And, you know, I think that's one of the things that I really love about Idelic is, you know, when we talk about that holistic analysis or view of a driver, you know, me as the safety director, there's you know, maybe operational issues that I might not know, or customer issues that I might not know that don't necessarily pertain directly to safety. But when I'm looking at this driver's risk assessment score, watch list score, I see all the ingredients that made that sauce, right? And now I know, you know, when I'm coaching a driver or working with a driver, I'm not just dealing with the fact that, you know, he had a rolling stop at a stop sign. I'm dealing with, you know, hey, customers have complained, or you know, you've been late to pickups or deliveries, or whatever the issues may be. So you get that, you can have an intelligent conversation with a driver. And like I said earlier, I think, you know, most of your good drivers actually appreciate that, you know, the company's watching out for me. The company cares, right? As long as you're not using it as a weapon, you're using it as a learning and growing tool. The drivers receive this very well.
Yep. Great point.
Couple of questions that have come in that I'd love to have each of you comment on a little bit, and they're relevant to this part of the conversation. Scott, you mentioned it a little bit, and Michael, I'd love to hear, and maybe we'll just double click on these, but definitely some questions around how do you help drivers in particular buy into all of the monitoring and data that's being collected, and then, oh, I'm on a list somewhere, or I have a score somewhere. How do you overcome that? And you know, if you have even specific stories, that would be great.
Again, it is getting them to understand, being transparent with the information, understand the consequences of the at-risk behavior. And sometimes, Tara, it's a really bad story. We had a gentleman who all the predictions were there, and we just weren't listening. I'm not trying to make this commercial about Idelic, but Idelic was pounding on the table that this driver has issues, whether it was, you know, hours of service issues, interaction with CSA, you know, just a lot of triggers. And then that gentleman had a horrific crash. And that was the buy-in for us. Wow, it's showing us that there's value to it. It's pointing us in the right direction. Again, that targeted approach. And then how we just spread that with the other drivers, the population, was getting their buy-in that, hey, this is just a tool to help you. You know, everybody's so afraid of technology because they don't understand it, they don't see it. But word travels fast, and it's sitting them down and helping them understand, hey, when I do increase my following distance, guess what? I get a little stressed out, and I'm not riding that brake. Hey, when all of a sudden I'm going 2 or 3 miles below the flow of traffic, things get a little bit easier because things are following by. Things kind of slow down. So that's the main approach we've had, you know, and I've got a handful of other success stories. Again, I always go back to, you hook that one person and the word spreads quickly. Again, it's positive. Hey, we want to help you drive safer. We want to help you prevent these events. We want to help get you home to your friends and family. Selfishly, they're out there sharing the roads with my friends and family. So I want them to be on top of their game.
Yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think, Scott really nailed it on the head. We talked earlier about the exonerations, and I think cameras are an easy example to give everybody, because a lot of people have either gone through this in the recent years or going through it now. Drivers didn't like cameras when we wanted to put them in the trucks. Can you believe that? And, that's, that we got a lot of pushback. And it was about 2 weeks after we had finally, installed them into the whole fleet that we had our first incident where on a police report, it said, this truck driver was doing something crazy. And here's the video footage that shows, here's the truck driver doing everything by the book, right?
Amazing.
And we published that to the whole fleet. I wanted everybody, every driver of ours, I wanted them to see the video and I wanted them to read the police report. And that was like flipping a switch, where drivers instantly stopped hating the cameras and said, hey, there's value here. The other part of it too is, it's really easy in safety, unfortunately, to focus a lot on negatives. And, I think the missing element is you have to work just as hard promoting the positives as you do trying to drive down the negatives, right? And once drivers realize this isn't just a weapon, right? Where I'm constantly getting whacked for something that I did wrong, that, hey, when I do it right, my company sees it and lets me know. Because I can tell you, in my driving experience, one of the most frustrating things about being a truck driver, you don't hear thank you and good job anywhere near as much as you should, right? And these kind of systems enable that for the driver, where I may not have known that this guy has gotten compliments from customers and has done an excellent job avoiding an accident and all these things, that now I can push that out to the fleet, celebrate that with the driver. And I promise you, after you do that, you have a hardcore advocate for your safety program when you embrace that kind of approach.
Yeah, Michael, you're so right, man. We're so quick to kick them in the teeth. We need to be just as quick to pat them on the back.
Absolutely.
And those near hits, encourage drivers to forward-facing cameras. Encourage them to tag those events. Those manual records. Not only do they love showing operations, what it's really like out there, on I-95, but it helps them brag a little bit that, hey, look what I prevented today. Look what I avoided. And Michael, that's spot on, man.
There's some other questions that are really relevant, and Michael and Scott, love to have you chime in on these a little bit. One of the questions that came in is, as you have been implementing professional development plans and working with your frontline managers, et cetera, have either of you had to go through any kind of restructuring of staffing to manage the PDPs, the data? What responsibilities for in operations versus safety in regards to kind of rolling out?
Yeah, Michael, go ahead, man. No, you got it, man.
All right. So for us here at Boyle, it kind of coincided very happily with some reorganization that we had in our operations department. Our operations specialists, they kind of interact with customers and drivers and the whole gambit of things. We said, well, really, it's not doing as good of a service to our drivers, because they're our internal customer, our professional drivers. So we said, let's devote a segment of the operations staff that just manage the interactions with drivers, the communications with drivers, and those kind of things. And, around this time, we're going live with Idelic, and, we have the driver support team that's what we call it, driver support team. They're users of the Idelic system, right? So they're a lot of the ones that are putting in the customer compliments and the hours of service observations and those things into that system. So it was pretty easy for us to get buy-in internally. I think that's about it.
Scott?
We do the same thing. We put a lot on our frontline operations team. They're the ones that see the driver on a daily basis. They're the ones that holds the driver accountable. We did see a shift, and Idelic was fortunate enough to be able to help us. There was some issues with developing these plans, how to properly roll them out, and that's where we got the great support to put these together and kind of make that shift a little bit. We didn't have to change our staffing at all, but we did use idelic support for the initiatives to help roll out to our operations, to our frontline folks.
And if I could just add a little something else, one of the things that we did was, to address retention, right? Retention's obviously, big on everybody's radar. We created professional development plans for, 30, 60, 90 days after we hire a professional driver, where all the department heads, maintenance, safety, operations, HR, payroll, we have a call with that. We hire teams. So when we hire driver teams, so we have a call with that team, and they get FaceTime with all the department heads, and they feel like that, it kind of creates this environment where they know they're part of the team. And we've done that using the idelic PDPs, the professional development plans, and that has been a game changer for us. We in retention numbers post hire. A lot of times you hire a driver and they say, hey, this isn't my cup of tea or something, but this has kind of given us a way to enable us to track how a driver's progressing. Are they comfortable? Are they getting supported? Do they feel overwhelmed? And we can kind of work to address that with the driver, and it's made a big difference for us.
Mm-hmm. Good.
If I can just interject on that for just one moment. So talking about the driver and how they're going to react, and are they making progress or not making progress, that's really one of the areas that I think is a great opportunity for predictive analytics as we go forward in the future. It's awesome that we have access to this data now, and we're starting to put these meaningful and accurate predictions out there of how likely something bad or good is going to happen. But where we need to go beyond that is, what is the most effective intervention that you can deploy? And how do you know, based on that specific driver and specific situation, what works and what doesn't work, right? And I think that as an industry, we're still lacking quite a bit there. That's an area where idelic is investing a lot, is trying to talk those PDPs, the professional development plans that Michael talked about, right? Having that kind of a standardized approach to coaching and mentoring allows you then to measure efficacy of a certain intervention versus another, so you can start to get more prescriptive, right? We not just tell you that there's a problem, but tell you what the best thing is that you can do about it.
Thanks, Brian. We're getting great questions coming in, and I want to make sure that we have some time to do this. And if each of you could open up your QA panel, you can take a look at them, and if there's any that you have passion around. But I think this is a really good one. We have someone who asked and wants to hear really from all three of you regarding information overload. How does idelic manage terabytes of information, or how much data that is there, and distill that down to showing, kind of just what matters?
Yeah, it's like to Mike's whack-a-mole, the idelic, it packages it together. It gives you different blocks of drivers at different watch list scores. 90 to 100 is the first grouping, and it really allows you just to hone on it. Look at that driver with a high watch list score. Focus on the behaviors, the at-risk behaviors that are driving the numbers, and telling you that, hey, there's an issue coming. So it alerts you quickly to the behaviors, how to address them. Brian and Michael both talked about the PDPs, professional development plans, of how to attack that. We use the same standardized one. So we understand that a driver, in one location is getting the same information as a driver in another, with the caveat that, hey, there might be some other elements. We're not going to treat a driver in Minneapolis the same way we treat a driver in Boston or Florida. So it allows you to still tailor that to make it specific.
Yeah, I agree with what Scott said. I think, the thing that's great with the idelic platform is you have different users in different, segments or different parts of your business, right? So you could have HR involved, your operations team, your safety team, your maintenance team, and you get it gives a home to all the data, all the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, gives a home for all of that, right? So now everybody, it kind of uses this as I got to talk to Tara. Let me take a look at what Tara has going on first, right? And now you know what that conversation is going to be, and where your efforts are best spent to try to, add some value, whether it's a safety issue, or maybe it's someone that doesn't get their payroll stuff in on time. And I have nothing to do with payroll, but if I'm talking to Tara and about something else, I might say, hey, by the way, make sure you don't forget your payroll this week. Well, now Tara knows we're all watching out for you. You know, it's watching out for the driver, not watching over the driver. So, you know, I think that's really a big piece of that value.
Yeah,
For sure.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to filtering, right? So Idalic's job is to filter down all of that data and present to Michael or Scott what is most relevant for them to know when they engage with the driver. And the reason that we can do that is because of the machine learning technologies that we use. So if you just had a standard scorecard, right, it's not going to cut it. There's too much data and too many ways that those data can interact with each other, and there's too many false assumptions that we as people just make about the data. So just a scorecard doesn't cut it. When we put in a machine learning and actually see what correlates to risk, now Idelic knows what some of those factors are that are going to be most important, and we put it in front of Scott very, very clearly to say, with this driver, here is the ranked list of the things that are the highest to lowest risk with that person, right? So it's just a filter. That's what it comes down. We have to filter through the noise to find what matters. And machine learning is the tool that helps us to do that.
that's great. Brian, did you look at the other questions in there by chance? There are a few.
Yeah, I'm scanning through them. Anything specific?
Scan through them. Here's one I'd love to toss out. With owner operator fleets, do you have any advice on implementing additional safety tech without blurring the line of contractor versus employee?
Well, I'll say that I don't deal with owner operators at Boyle Transportation. We have entirely all company employees. But I'll say this: if you're capturing data on your subcontractors or owner operators, you know, you as the person that's managing this fleet, you have a focus point, right? As opposed to, you know, hey, owner operators are kind of their own animal. You know, you're able to tell the folks that are having you know, negative encounters with customers, you know, through feedback from your customers, or you know, maybe if cameras are involved or whatever. You get this picture of a driver. At least now you have the opportunity to know maybe it's best not to schedule driver X on this one. Maybe we put them on that one instead, right? So it at least gives you a focus point, you know, to help you make well-informed business decisions, for sure.
Yeah, Tara, you've heard Michael and I talk about using technology and getting in front of drivers and how we can use it to coach and improve their performance. You haven't once heard us say discipline, right? No. You don't want to discipline off that technology. You want to make that driver better, help them hone their skills. No offense, whether it's an employee, an owner operator, an IE, they're out there sharing the roads with our friends and family. We want to make them better. And and everybody that uses the IE model understands how they can modify that behavior. Man, you got the information at your fingertips, use it. Help that driver become a better driver.
Since Jeff called me out specifically, he says, Brian, can you talk about the new driver score training that will come out soon? So that is specific to Idelic. The driver score, our watch list score, which is this measure of relative risk in your fleet, we're expanding it so that we can now show a history and trend information to show if somebody's scores are going up and down and how fast and what over what time frame, which gives you just another way to, at a quick glance, understand if you are improving or degrading in certain areas. So that's an enhancement that we're rolling out shortly, and not just at the driver level, but also at the terminal level and higher levels in the business as well. So you can see in general, are we trending up or down? I've got a problem in this terminal in San Diego, but I'm doing great in Houston. So yeah, that's something that we're actively deploying right now.
Brian, we can't wait. We've been bugging people about that for a while, so thank you.
Yeah, you'll see a lot more about that next week, actually, Scott.
Outstanding.
So we are at time, and this has been an incredible discussion. I want to first thank each of you for participating on this panel. You know, if I had to recap, obviously, AI and ML is here. It's going to increase over time as fleet technology continues to expand also. And I think, main takeaways that I've heard from each of you are this is powerful technology that can help a fleet make better decisions around building a safety culture, more proactively coaching drivers to either intervene, hopefully prevent future accidents that are there, and buy-in from both the driver level, the manager level, all the way to the top is an incredibly critical piece of that. Again, I want to thank each of you. There are several questions that we did not have a chance to answer. We will follow up individually with each individual and make sure we've answered those. And thank you. This was great.
Yeah, and if you're anonymous, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn and we'll try to get your questions answered for you because they're great questions and I'm more than happy to address any of them. Just reach out, let me know.
Excellent. Thank
Great
you so
job.
much
Thank you.
to
Thank
all of
you.
our panelists today for such a great conversation, very impactful session. For all of our attendees, thank you for joining us again. And once again, we would like to encourage you to enroll in any of TCA's certificate programs to earn credit for your attendance and participation in today's event. We have also provided contact information for each of our speakers so that you can reach out to them following today's webinar to continue the conversation. So when the webinar closes, you will be redirected to an online survey, and we ask that you take a moment to fill it out. So this concludes our webinar, and I would love to wish everyone a wonderful afternoon, and thanks again.